I didn't do it to prove anything. I just wanted to fix it. That's what 14-year-old Elijah James said after doing what no top engineer at the MacArthur facility could in 10 whole years. But how did a janitor's son, armed with nothing but a notebook, an old laptop, and raw passion, crack a problem that stumped PhDs and AI systems alike? Why did the chief engineer fear what he uncovered? And what really happened on the day he dared to touch the engine that everyone called cursed? Stick around, because this story will twist your expectations and inspire you in ways you won't see coming. Dear viewer, if you are watching my story for the first time, I humbly request you write the location from where you are watching right now. Subscribe this channel and press the bell icon now not to miss the notifications of my daily published new stories. Thank you, and let's dive into the full story. The smell of motor oil and polish hung thick in the air of the McCarthy Advanced Engineering Facility. It was a quiet summer morning on the outskirts of Baltimore, where million-dollar machines and military prototypes lined up in clean, gleaming rows, untouched by most. Engineers in blue and among them, unnoticed and unvalued, moved a man with a gray mop and worn-out boots, Harlan James, the janitor. At 51, his back had bent from decades of quiet labor. His eyes, though tired, still had a softness when they rested on his son. 14-year-old Elijah James wasn't supposed to be there. Technically, children weren't allowed on the facility floor. But when school let out and his father couldn't afford take-care, Elijah became a shadow in the background, sitting quietly near the storage room, sketching engine diagrams on the backs of used paper, or following his father with the mop bucket, absorbing every detail the world discarded. Most saw him as the janitor's boy. None asked what he knew. Elijah didn't look like much. Skinny, quiet, always in oversized hand-me-down clothes and a hoodie pulled low over his head. But behind those observant eyes was a brain that ticked faster than most. While other kids gamed, Elijah disassembled radios he found in dumpsters and reverse-engineered their circuitry. He devoured YouTube videos on combustion engines and airflow mechanics, then tried improving the designs on his own. But nobody at McCarthy cared about what a janitor's son knew. Especially not Chief Engineer Meredith Halber. A sharp woman in her late 40s with platinum blonde hair and a cold stare, Meredith ran the engineering division like a courtroom. She wore pristine heels that clacked against the metal floors and dismissed incompetence with surgical precision. She had no patience for mistakes or mop buckets, and she certainly had none for a boy from East Baltimore loitering around million-dollar tech. "Why is he here again, Harlan?" she asked one morning, pausing as she saw Elijah doodling something beside the compressor room. "This isn't a daycare." "He's not bothering anyone, ma'am," Harlan replied softly, not meeting her eyes. "Just sitting. He likes to draw." Meredith raised an eyebrow and looked down at Elijah. The boy didn't flinch, just met her eyes with quiet calm and returned to his sketch. She leaned forward and snatched the paper from his hands. "Is this?" "A modified 4-stroke layout," Elijah said simply. "I was trying to reduce intake lag." Meredith blinked. "You were what?" "I added a second inlet manifold, dual valve timing. It's just an idea." The other engineers nearby laughed, loud and cruel. "Cute," muttered one. "Next he'll be redesigning the fusion engine." "The one nobody's been able to fix for 10 years, another scoffed. "Please." Elijah looked around. "What fusion engine?" The laughter grew louder. A tall man with a clipboard and a shiny MIT pin on his lapel stepped forward. "Listen, Junior, there's an engine buried back in Bay 9, top-of-the-line aerospace-grade prototype, burned out during a test run in 15. Nobody's been able to get it running since. They bring it out for training sometimes, let the new engineers try and figure out what's wrong. It's like a rite of passage." Meredith smiled thinly. "And no one's ever succeeded." Elijah's curiosity lit up. "Can I see it?" "You?" she said sharply. "This isn't a game. That engine's worth more than your father's entire salary history." "Let the kid see the graveyard," one of the younger engineers jeered. "He might learn something, like where mops belong. Laughter echoed again, but Elijah didn't respond. He stood and followed the path they pointed to. Harlan reached out but hesitated. He knew his son, knew that look. The boy wasn't just curious, he was focused, and when Elijah got focused, the world disappeared. Day 9 was a quiet cavern at the far edge of the facility, isolated by thick glass walls and motion-remote lights. And there it sat, the Fusion X2 engine. Its chassis was a sculpture of stainless steel and carbon fiber, curved with aerodynamic finesse, surrounded by notes, blueprints, and decades of failure. It looked more like an art piece than an engine now, untouched, sacred, and forever dormant. Elijah stood before it like one might before a sleeping giant, and though it had been labeled beyond repair, he didn't see a corpse. He saw a challenge. Behind him, Meredith folded her arms. Understand this. That engine has stumped PhDs, veterans, and AI diagnostics. You think you'll do what they couldn't? I don't know, Elijah said, but I'd like to try. The engineers snorted. You'll blow your fingers off before you even find the starter sequence. Don't worry, Elijah said, voice calm. I've been building engines since I was 9, just smaller. Meredith was unmoved. Don't touch anything. You can look, that's all. Elijah nodded, but his eyes were already scanning the panels, the ports, the scars of old failure. He saw clues in the dust, in the misplaced bolts, in the scorched insulation nobody had ever fully replaced. Later that night, back at home in their tiny apartment, Elijah pulled out his notebook. He redrew the engine from memory, labeled parts, hypothesized faults. It would be weeks before they let him near it again. But something had shifted. He had seen the impossible, and he wasn't afraid. For the next few weeks, Elijah returned to the MacArthur facility each day with his father, and each day, after helping mop the far corridors, he would drift back to Bay 9 during lunch breaks, notebook in hand, studying the Fusion X2 from behind the glass. The other engineers rarely paid him attention now, except to mock if they noticed him at all. Little man's writing a novel about it, one snickered. Chapter 1, How to Stare at an Engine. Others chuckled. Chief Engineer Meredith barely acknowledged his presence. She had more pressing concerns, deadlines for new prototype developments, reports to corporate sponsors, and training cycles for the rotating staff of eager young graduates. A janitor's boy scribbling notes wasn't a threat. It was an amusement. Harlan watched from afar, a quiet pride in his chest. He knew his son wasn't like other kids. Elijah saw patterns others missed, remembered every detail, learned faster than he should have. But in a place like this, where degrees from MIT and Stanford were framed on every wall, raw talent didn't mean much without pedigree. Harlan tried to warn him. Some of these folks, he said one evening driving home, they think respect's something you're born with, not earned. You be careful, don't push too hard. Elijah looked out the window, notebook in his lap. I'm not trying to show off, Dad. I think I can figure it out. Harlan sighed. That engine's older than you, been called cursed by folks 3 times your size. Elijah smiled softly. Maybe that's why no one fixed it yet. At home, while his father cooked dinner, Elijah stayed up late under a dim lamp. He pulled apart diagrams downloaded from public patent archives. He reverse-engineered theoretical specs of high-efficiency combustion models. And in the back pages of his notebook he began drawing a modified flowchart for the Fusion X2's ignition system, something no one at MacArthur seemed to have considered. The problem wasn't mechanical, at least not entirely. The scorch patterns around the second-stage intake suggested a timing fault, not a physical break. Something in the control circuitry was causing catastrophic misfire during Phase 2 of the ignition cycle, if that sequence could be modified or bypassed. The next day, Meredith called an open demonstration in Bay 9 for a visiting corporate team. Young engineers prepped their presentations. Screens were wheeled in, and at the back, unnoticed, Elijah slipped inside, watching every word, every slide. As the chief engineer presented failure reports on the Fusion X2, the same lines were repeated, burned out in 2015 during Phase 2 ignition. Secondary manifold collapsed at 6,000 RPM. Diagnostic AIs unable to isolate root cause. Finally, during Q&A, one of the visitors asked, "Has anyone tried a firmware override on the secondary ignition?" The control firmware is proprietary and locked under defense-grade encryption. It would take years of legal clearance just to attempt a rewrite. We work with what's available. Elijah's eyes widened. That was it. The firmware loop. If the timing could be adjusted before Phase 2. He didn't speak, of course, not then. No one would listen. But the seed of the solution was planted. That afternoon, while the engineers packed up and Meredith barked instructions, Elijah lingered near the corner of Bay 9. An old mechanic named Mr. Vince, in his 60S, caught him staring. "Still dreaming, kid?" Vince chuckled. Elijah nodded. "Just thinking." Vince smiled. "That thing's a window maker, left a lot of good folks scratching their heads. But it's pretty, ain't it?" "Yeah," Elijah replied, "but pretty won't fix it." The old man laughed. "You got guts, I'll give you that." Later that week, a stroke of fortune came. Meredith approved a minor system diagnostic sweep on the Fusion X2. The engineers were busy prepping for another project and left Vince to manage the session alone in Bay 9. And Vince, old and kind, nodded when Elijah approached with wide eyes. 10 minutes, Vince said. "Touch nothing, just look." It was the first time Elijah stood close to the machine. The fusion casing gleamed under the fluorescence. He ran his hands along the edge, then crouched to examine the exposed access ports. The data interface was ancient, hardwired, no wireless sync. But the firmware chipset, yes, it could be swapped, maybe even overridden manually. He memorized every detail. At home that night, Elijah sketched the control layout from memory. Then, taking an old Raspberry Pi from a junk box, he began coding an emulation sequence. If he could fake the Phase 2 signal just enough to test his theory. But he needed more data, and more access. The next week, Meredith announced an open competition for junior engineers. Whoever could diagnose a new fault on the Fusion X2 would earn a department credit. Fixing it was deemed impossible, but diagnosing was still worth points on a resume. Elijah's heart raced. That was his chance. When he asked his father, Harlan frowned. "Son, you know they won't let you enter." "I don't need to enter," Elijah said. "I just need to be in the room." Harlan sighed deeply. "All right, but if anyone says leave, you leave. Hear me?" "I hear you." And so, on competition day, with a mop in one hand and his notebook tucked in his hoodie, Elijah followed his father inside. The room buzzed with young engineers in polished shoes and pressed coats. Meredith stood at the front, arms crossed. "Rules are simple," she announced. "No hardware changes, no code uploads, diagnostic tools only. Best theory wins." Her eyes flicked to Elijah. "You, janitor's boy, this is a closed session." Harlan started to pull him back, but Elijah spoke softly. "I stay out the way, ma'am, just watching." A long pause. Then Meredith smirked. "Fine, watch and learn." Elijah did. He watched everything. As the engineers ran test after test, they missed the feedback glitch between the primary phase sensors and the Phase 2 override loop. Elijah saw the signal spike on one of the screens, a blip so fast none of the others seemed to notice. But he did. And in that moment he knew. The engine wasn't broken, it was misinformed, and maybe, just maybe, he could fix it. The following days felt like a current humming beneath Elijah's skin. Every moment at the facility sharpened his focus. He moved like a ghost between the engineers, unseen but watching. His father, Harlan, noticed the change. "Can't let this thing take you over." "I'm close, Dad," Elijah replied softly. "Closer than anyone's been." Harlan's heart clenched. He'd always taught his son to dream, but this? Taking on a problem that had crushed veterans, PhDs, and elite AI programs? He worried what would happen when the inevitable dismissal came. A janitor's boy had no place in a competition of engineers. Still, he couldn't stop Elijah's fire. It was too bright. Too rare. Meanwhile, news of the upcoming second round of the Fusion X2 competition began spreading through the MacArthur facility. Meredith had been unimpressed with the first results. The corporate backers wanted progress, or at least the appearance of effort. So another session was scheduled for the following Friday. Deeper tests. New diagnostics. Elijah listened carefully to every conversation in the halls. He learned the schedule. He learned who would be on shift. And most importantly, he learned that Bay 9's older diagnostic interface would be activated for that round to allow deeper waveform monitoring. That was the opportunity he needed. But there was a problem. Meredith wouldn't let him anywhere near the active equipment, and even if he snuck in, he'd need a bridge device, something that could interface between the ancient control system and his Raspberry Pi emulator. That kind of adapter wasn't lying around in a janitor's closet. So, Elijah went to the only person who might listen. "Mr. Vince," he asked one afternoon, cornering the old mechanic in the break room, "can I ask a favor?" Vince leaned back in his chair. "Depends, kid. You gonna tell me you figured out the Widowmaker?" Elijah's voice was quiet, steady. "Not yet, but I know what's wrong with it," Vince blinked. "Son, even the brass upstairs gave up. You telling me you spotted something they didn't?" Elijah nodded. "There's a feedback loop glitch. Phase 2 ignition. The sensors aren't lying, they're just getting the wrong signal. I can emulate the correct one, but I need an interface adapter." Vince stared at him, then chuckled and shook his head. "You got a pair, I'll give you that." He took a sip of his coffee, then leaned in lower. "Even if you're right, which I ain't saying you are, you know they won't let you test nothing. You touch that engine without clearance, you and your dad could both get kicked out of here." Elijah met his gaze. "I don't want to break rules, I just want a shot. If I can run a simulation, I'll know, that's all." For a long moment, Vince was silent. Then he sighed, rubbed his chin, and glanced around the empty room. "All right, kid. I got an old Type D adapter stashed. Damn thing's ancient, but it might talk to that panel. I ain't saying you should use it, but if you happen to find it behind locker 17, well, that's your business." Elijah's heart leapt. "Thank you, sir." "Don't thank me yet," Vince grumbled. "You pull this off, you'll make enemies, and if you don't, well, you'd best not be seen." That night, Elijah stayed up until dawn, soldering connections, coding interface drivers, and refining his emulation sequence. The software wasn't perfect, but it would be enough to test his theory. Friday came too fast. The second diagnostic round buzzed with tension. More engineers this time, more eyes. Meredith presided over the session in her sharp heels and colder gaze. "Remember," she said to the group, "no unauthorized uploads. Anyone caught bypassing system protocols will be removed immediately." Elijah stood at the back, mop in hand, honey up, eyes locked on the control panels. His father tried to distract him with small tasks, but the boy barely noted. His mind was racing. As the tests began, Elijah moved carefully. He waited for the lunch break window, when the main engineers would rotate out, leaving only Vince and a few techs to monitor the idle diagnostics. It would be a 10-minute gap, no more. When the moment came, Vince gave a subtle nod from across the room. Elijah moved. In 3 quick steps he was inside the interface bay, crouched beneath the ancient panel. He connected the Type D adapter to the service port, heart hammering. No alarm. Good. He plugged in his Raspberry Pi. The screen blinked. Connection established. Fingers trembling, Elijah ran the emulation program. Lines of code scrolled. Phase 1, stable. Phase 2, override initiated. Timing loop adjusted. Error feedback, none. Elijah's breath caught. It was working. But then, a voice. "What the hell are you doing?" Meredith. Back early. Elijah scrambled to pull the adapter loose, but it was too late. She was there in a flash, yanking him back by the hood. "You little fool," she snapped. "You think this is a playground? You could have damaged a prototype worth millions." The room went dead silent. Engineers froze. Harlan rushed in, eyes wide. "Ma'am, please," he began, but Meredith cut him off. "Get this boy out of here," she barked. "And if you ever bring him near my engines again, you're both gone, understand?" Vince tried to step in. "Chief, maybe hear the kid out." "No." Meredith's eyes blazed. "This is not a hobby project for janitor brats." Elijah's heart pounded, not from fear, but fury. He met her glare with steady eyes. "I wasn't guessing," he said quietly. "I saw the problem. Your engineers missed it." Meredith's jaw clenched. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Yes, I do," Elijah said. Feedback loop. "You're burning phase 2 before ignition stabilizes. The engine's fine, it's your timing." Gasps echoed. Meredith's face darkened. "Out. Now." Harlan grabbed Elijah's arm. "Come on, son, don't make it worse." As they were dragged from the bay, Elijah felt the weight of every eye on him, some mocking, some stunned, and a few intrigued. He hadn't proven anything yet, but now they knew. The janitor's boy wasn't blind, and he wasn't done. That night at home, Elijah sat on his bed, staring at his battered Raspberry Pi and the now frayed Type D adapter. His notebook lay open, filled with equations, flow diagrams, and one glaring truth. He had been right. The emulator had run. No feedback errors. For the first time in 10 years, the engine had processed Phase 2 ignition without triggering a fault, if only for a few seconds before Meredith had cut him off. But it didn't matter. He'd been thrown out, humiliated. His father sat on the couch nearby, hen in his hands. "You got fire, boy," Harlan said softly. "But that woman? She'll bury us both if you go near that engine again." "I know, Dad," Elijah whispered. "But I saw it. I know I can fix it. That ain't the point, son. These folks, they got power. They'll never give you credit. Hell, they'd rather scrap the engine than let a kid from East Baltimore show them up." For the first time, Elijah's voice wavered. "Then what do I do? Just let it sit there? Let them laugh?" Harlan looked up, eyes heavy. "Sometimes you gotta wait. Let the dust settle. You rush back in, you'll just get hurt worse." Elijah stared at his notebook. Waiting wasn't in his nature, but for now, maybe his father was right. The next week passed in a blur. Meredith avoided even looking at the Jameses when Harlan arrived for shifts. Elijah wasn't allowed near Bay 9. He spent his afternoons helping clean the maintenance wings, keeping his head down, though whispers still followed him. "That's the kid who hacked the engine. Nearly fried the core, they say. Stupid to even try." But not everyone mocked. One morning, Vince cornered Elijah near the tool lockers. "Damn shame what happened," the old mechanic said. "But you rattled 'em, kid. Some of the young bucks been talking, said your override worked." Elijah blinked. "Really? Word spreads fast here. Of course the top brass'll never admit it, but between us, whatever you did, it was real. If I could run a full cycle, the engine would start." Vince scratched his beard. "I don't doubt it. But you're iced out now, son. Meredith got Bay 9 locked tighter than Fort Knox." "I just need one more shot." Vince shook his head. "Won't happen. Unless—" He hesitated, then leaned in. "Listen, next month's the Founders Showcase. Big VIP event. Tours, demos, suits and fancy clothes. They always haul the Fusion X2 out front. Showpiece, even though it's dead. If someone were to, say, trigger a startup during that, nobody could stop it." Elijah's heart pounded. "You think I could?" Vince smiled. "If you're half as smart as you seem, you could. Just gotta be ready." That night, Elijah barely slept. He pored over his notes, refining his emulator code. The core issue remained. Once Phase 2 stabilized, the main system would reject any external signal. He needed a true override 1 that could sync perfectly with the native control firmware. He thought about it for hours. Then, at dawn, the answer came. The old auxiliary maintenance port, barely documented, forgotten in the newer schematics. But he'd seen it once, a dusty terminal behind the left manifold, used in original field diagnostics back in 15. If he could wire through that port, his signal wouldn't be blocked. It would work. Now he needed parts. A faster microcontroller, and cleaner code. He started saving every dollar from his weekend errands, skipped lunch to buy used components online. Even Harlan noticed. "You planning a revolution or something, son?" Elijah grinned. "Just a repair." As the weeks ticked down to the Founders Showcase, Elijah worked in secret, late nights in the apartment, coding on a borrowed laptop from a neighbor, testing on scrap engines salvaged from junkyards. Meanwhile, at MacArthur, the whispers grew louder. Kids obsessed. Elijah ignored it all. He wasn't trying to win an argument. He wasn't even trying to prove anyone wrong anymore. He just wanted to hear that engine run. And when the day of the showcase arrived, a bright Saturday with VIPs in suits and photographers snapping glossy shots, Bay 9's doors rolled open. The Fusion X2 was wheeled to the front of the exhibition floor, polished to a mirror sheen. Elijah stood at the edge of the crowd, hoodie up, backpack slung low. In it, his finished emulator rig. Slim, fast, wired for the old auxiliary port. Harlan noticed him and whispered fiercely, "Son, don't. Not today. Too many eyes." I have to, Elijah said quietly. It's ready. Before Harlan could argue, the crowd surged forward. VIPs applauded as Meredith stepped up to the podium. Ladies and gentlemen, she announced, here stands the Fusion X2, a marvel of modern engineering if sadly still waiting for a worthy hand to revive it. A ripple of polite laughter followed. Elijah moved with the crowd, slipping closer to the display, closer to history, closer to his chance. The founder's showcase hummed with energy. Rows of white tents, polished banners, catered buffets, and clusters of VIPs in tailored suits filled the MacArthur facility. Flashbulbs popped as reporters angled for shots of gleaming prototypes. But the centerpiece was Bay 9's offering, the Fusion X2 engine, standing tall on a rotating display platform, ringed by velvet ropes. Elijah stood at the far edge, hood low, backpack heavy on his shoulder. His heart pounded with every step forward. His plan was dangerous. One wrong move and he could ruin everything, not just for himself, but for his father, too. Harlan's warning echoed in his mind. You get caught today, we both gone. But the chance was too close now. Vince's words gave him courage. His own endless nights of study gave him certainty. He knew this engine better than anyone in the room. Across the crowd he spotted Meredith, flanked by corporate sponsors and young engineers, their badges gleaming. She was in command, confident as ever. And of course, she told her guests, this relic remains a valuable training tool, even though its operational days are behind us. Polite chuckles. A few engineers smirked. Elijah's grip tightened on his backpack strap. Behind the display stage, Vince caught his eye, gave the faintest nod. One opportunity, that's all. Elijah waited for the shift change, when the security posted at the stage would rotate briefly to refresh. He timed it carefully, watched the guards trade places. 30 seconds. He moved. In one smooth motion he slid under the rope line, ducked behind the engine's left intake, and crouched at the old maintenance panel. Just as he remembered Dusty, half forgotten. His fingers worked quickly, popping open the aged cover to reveal the auxiliary port. Click. The adapter cable slotted in. Raspberry Pi connected. Elijah's pulse raced. The emulator booted up, lines of code scrolling across the tiny screen. Phase 1, stable. Phase 2, override, initialized. Timing sync 98%, 99%. Suddenly, a sharp voice cut through the din. Hey, you, what are you doing? One of the younger engineers spotted him. Heads turned. Meredith's gaze snapped toward the stage, eyes narrowing as she saw the boy at the engine. Elijah! Harlan's voice called out, panicked. But Elijah didn't flinch. His fingers danced over the keyboard. Override, signal, live, ignition cycle beginning. The crowd gasped as warning lights on the engine's panel lit up. For the first time in a decade, the Fusion X2 came alive. A low hum filled the air. Meredith pushed through the throng. Shut it down, now! Somebody stop him! 2 security men rushed forward, but it was too late. Phase 2 ignition synced. Engine status, a fish afoot. With a sharp whine, the Fusion X2's turbines began spinning. Air intakes fluttered. Diagnostic lights flashed green. Smooth, stable, controlled. Elijah stood slowly, hands at his sides, watching the impossible happen. He had done it. The crowd erupted into gasps and astonished chatter. Is that... the engine's running. How? Meredith stormed to the panel, her face pale, her voice tight. Cut the feed! Kill the power! But the system wasn't responding. Elijah's emulator had synced perfectly, an elegant bypass, not a hack. The engine was running correctly, not forced. Vince stepped up beside her, voice low. He didn't damage it, Chief. He fixed it. More voices joined in. Impossible. That kid, he cracked it? The janitor's boy. Harlan stood frozen at the edge of the crowd, equal parts terrified and awed. Finally, after long seconds, Elijah reached down and calmly shut off his device. The engine spun down smoothly, lights returning to standby. Silence fell. The room was stunned. Meredith's face twisted in disbelief. How? How did you do that? Elijah met her eyes, steady and calm. The timing loop. Your diagnostics never saw it. The firmware was cycling bad data. I synced a correct signal through the auxiliary port. Her mouth opened, then closed. No words came. Behind her, the corporate sponsors whispered urgently among themselves. One bold VP stepped forward, eyes wide. "Young man, what's your name?" "Elijah James," he replied softly. "My dad's the janitor." Another pause. Then a murmur swept the room. The janitor's son had done what 10 years of elite engineers couldn't, and no one could deny it. For a long moment, the entire exhibition floor held its breath. The mighty Fusion X2 stood silent but alive again, proof undeniable. Engineers stared. Reporters scribbled notes furiously. The corporate guests, once casually polite, now whispered in urgent tones, glancing at Elijah, then at Meredith. Harlan stood frozen on the sidelines, fists clenched. He could hardly believe what he'd seen. His son, barely 14, had just revived the one thing no expert could. But the danger was clear. Eyes were on them now. Important eyes. Meredith's face was pale, her mouth a tight line of fury and disbelief. Her mind raced to find control of the narrative. She had ruled MacArthur Facility for years, her word unquestioned. And now? Now a janitor's boy had stolen the spotlight. Before the sponsors could speak again, she raised her voice sharply. "This demonstration was," she snapped, glaring at Elijah. "This boy violated multiple security protocols and tampered with protected equipment. That is ground for removal and disciplinary action." Murmurs swept the room, some agreeing, others clearly uncomfortable. One of the younger engineers spoke quietly. "But, Chief, the engine ran." "That is not the point," Meredith hissed. "Procedure matters. Chain of command matters. He's the first to even get it started." Meredith turned on him. "And you think that excuses unauthorized tampering?" Vince shrugged. "I think results speak louder than excuses." The tension crackled in the air. Several sponsors now eyed Meredith with growing doubt. One tall VP in a Navy suit cleared his throat. "Chief Halbert," he said coolly, "it seems to me that Mr. James here, young Mr. James, regardless of protocol, perhaps we should hear him out." Meredith's jaw worked furiously. "Sir, he is a child, an untrained janitor's son. This engine requires advanced knowledge, not guesswork." Elijah, standing by the engine, finally spoke, voice quiet, clear. "It wasn't guesswork. I studied your schematics. I reviewed the old failure reports. I ran simulations. Your diagnostics were missing the feedback loop era. That's why no one could fix it." Gasps echoed again. Several engineers exchanged glances. A sponsor asked, "How did you know to use the auxiliary port?" Elijah shrugged. "It was in the earliest design for the updates. I figured it was still active." More murmurs, this time impressed. Meredith's grip tightened around her clipboard. She could feel her authority slipping. If this spread beyond today, if word got out, her spotless record could crack. "No matter what, impressive or not," she said harshly, "this remains a violation. The boy and his father are done here, effective immediately." A collective intake of breath. Harlan finally pushed forward, voice shaking with anger. "Now hold on. You can't punish my boy for showing what your whole team missed." "He hacked secure systems," Meredith shot back. "That is grounds for dismissal." One of the sponsors frowned. "Is that what you want reported to corporate, Chief? That your team was outperformed and your response was expulsion?" For the first time, Meredith faltered. Across the crowd, more phones came out recording the moment. She could see it now. Headlines: "Janitor's son fixes legendary engine, fired on the spot." Her breath hissed out through her teeth. "Fine. You want a show? Then let's test him." Eyes widened. Vince stared. "Chief," she raised her voice to the crowd, "if young Mr. James is so certain, if this wasn't some fluke, then we will schedule a formal demonstration. Full oversight, no unauthorized equipment. If he can replicate this under proper conditions, then we'll talk." She smiled thinly at Elijah, her tone condescending. "Agreed." Elijah's eyes met hers. No fear, no hesitation. The crowd murmured louder now, some skeptical, some excited. Reporters leaned in. The VP in the Navy suit nodded. "I think that's a very wise course of action, Chief. The board will expect to be notified." Meredith forced a tight smile. "Of course." She turned sharply, stalking away to bark orders at her staff. Vince came up to Elijah, patting his shoulder. "Kid, you just kicked a hornet's nest. You sure about this?" Elijah nodded. "I can do it." Harlan shook his head, a hand on his son's shoulder. "Son, you ain't got nothing to prove. You already showed them." Elijah looked at him, eyes calm. "I didn't do it to prove anything, Dad. I just wanted to fix it." And deep down he knew this was just the beginning. The formal demonstration would be a bigger test, one with stricter rules, more pressure, more eyes watching for him to fail. But he was ready, because now the world was watching. The days following the Founders Showcase were a whirlwind. News of the janitor's son who revived the dead engine spread quickly not just through MacArthur facility, but across engineering circles in Baltimore and beyond. A short video clip, caught by one of the VIP guests, even made its way online. Within 2 days, engineering forums were buzzing. "Kid cracked the feedback loop on the X2. Impossible. That engine's cursed." Anyone got the schematic he used. But inside MacArthur, the mood was tense. Meredith locked down Bay 9 entirely, restricted access, cleared the logs, doubled the security protocols. No one got in or out without her explicit approval. The official memo was cold. Formal demonstration to be scheduled in 2 weeks. Participants must submit methods in advance. No unauthorized devices allowed. Elijah knew exactly what that meant. They wanted to box him out, strip away his emulated advantage, force him to play by their terms. But he also knew he could adapt. He hadn't spent the last year learning for nothing. At home, Harlan paced the living room, anxious. "Son, this is getting big. Too big. You sure you want to go through with it? You proved your point. Folks seen it." Elijah sat calmly at the table, notebook open. "It's not about the point, Dad. It's about the engine. I want to finish what I started." "But Meredith, she's gunning for you, and for me." "I know." Elijah looked up. "That's why I can't afford to fail." Vince visited the apartment that night, bringing a battered briefcase. "Got something for you, kid," he said, setting it down. "Found these old interface manuals in storage. Might help you figure a workaround." Elijah opened the case. Yellowed pages, old circuit diagrams, firmware notes from the original X2 development. His eyes lit up. "Thank you, Mr. Vince." "Don't thank me yet," Vince said. "You win this thing, you'll make history. But you lose, well, Meredith's already on the warpath. Watch your back." Elijah nodded. "I will." For the next 2 weeks he worked harder than ever. By day he still followed his father into MacArthur, quietly cleaning floors while the engineers whispered and watched, some with curiosity, others with contempt. Meredith ignored him completely, but her orders were clear. No unauthorized access. No tools, no contact. By night, Elijah transformed their tiny apartment into a workshop. He built new circuits, wrote cleaner code, designed a portable emulator that could bypass the need for an external adapter. Small enough to hide in plain sight, yet powerful enough to sync with the engine's firmware. The biggest challenge wasn't technical, it was political. Meredith controlled the terms. Her team would be running the demonstration, setting the protocols, choosing which version of the firmware to load. Elijah had to be ready for anything. Harlan watched his son burn the candle at both ends, worry in his eyes. "You're fighting folks with more money, more power, more paper. They'll cheat if they gotta, I know," Elijah said. "That's why I'm making something they can't cheat." On the night before the demonstration, Elijah finally finished the last lines of code. He sat back, exhausted, looking at the tiny black device now wired into a basic housing area, small enough to fit in his final tool. "Ready," he whispered. The next morning dawned bright and sharp. MacArthur buzzed with unusual energy. The official invite list for the demonstration had grown. Engineers stood in formation, systems armed and prepped. At precisely 10 o'clock IEM, Meredith took the floor in a tailored suit, voice clear. "Welcome to the formal test session," she announced. "Today we will demonstrate that the Fusion X2 can be restored properly under professional supervision." Her eyes flicked toward Elijah, standing quietly at the edge of the room with Harlan and Vince beside him. "Mr. James has been granted a controlled opportunity to replicate his result," Meredith continued, tone ice. "Per our agreement, all methods will be disclosed, all devices approved." She turned sharply. "Mr. James, are you prepared?" Elijah stepped forward, calm, steady. "Yes, ma'am. Submit your method," Meredith demanded. Elijah reached into his pocket, pulled out the tiny black device, and handed it over. Meredith's brow furrowed. "What is this?" "A passive sync emulator," Elijah explained. "Runs open-source code. You can inspect it." She gestured to her top engineers, who immediately scanned the device. Within minutes they reported back. No malware, no hacks, clean. Legal. Meredith's jaw tightened. She hadn't expected that. Very well, she said. Proceed. As dozens of eyes watched, he connected the device to the auxiliary port, not bypassing the system, but syncing with it. His fingers moved over the tiny control pad, loading the sync sequence. The room was silent save for the hum of servers and distant fans. Elijah pressed the final key. Phase 1, online. Phase 2, stable. Timing loop synced. The Fusion X2's turbines began to spin, steady, drawn. And this time they kept spinning. A clear, resonant hum filled the air. No sputter, no fault, no crash. The engine ran perfectly, the full cycle completing without a single error. Gasps echoed through Bay 9. "It's running," one of the engineers whispered. Vince grinned. "Damn right." Meredith stood frozen, eyes locked on the screen. No faults, no errors. It wasn't a fluke, it was a fix. Elijah stepped back, hands at his sides. "I believe that concludes the demonstration," he said softly. Reporters jotted notes furiously. The corporate sponsors exchanged excited glances. Meredith's face was unreadable, a queen dethroned, and for the first time everyone knew the janitor's son had won. The hum of the Fusion X2 still lingered in the air even after Elijah disconnected the emulator and the engine wound down to silence. The room was alive with murmurs and shocked glances. What had once been written off as an impossible task, unsolvable for nearly a decade, had been completed in front of the most important eyes in the building, and not by a credentialed engineer, not by Meredith's elite team, by a 14-year-old boy, the janitor's son. The corporate VPs were the first to break the stunned silence. The tall man in the navy suit, Monsieur Grayson, one of the major investors, stepped forward, eyes gleaming. "Incredible work, young man," he said, voice carrying across the room. "You've done what no one else here could." He turned toward Meredith. "I trust this result will be documented and presented to the board." Meredith forced a tight smile, though her eyes burned. "Of course, Mr. Grayson." Another VP chimed in. "Frankly, Chief Halbert, this breakthrough could revive our entire propulsion line, and if I'm not mistaken, Mr. James here has detailed notes on his process." Elijah nodded. "Yes, sir. I've logged everything." The engineers looked at one another. Whispers turned to cautious respect. Some of the younger staff were openly impressed, others embarrassed by how they'd once mocked. Vince stood off to the side, grinning wide, but not everyone was pleased. Meredith's pride, her authority, had been shattered. This was her facility, her domain, and now the narrative was out of her hands. Her mind raced for a response, a way to claw back control. "While impressive," she began coolly, "let's not forget this demonstration was not the product of sanctioned research. It was an unsupervised side project by a minor with no formal training." Grayson's expression darkened. "Is that how you wish to frame the success of your facility's greatest technical breakthrough in a decade, Chief?" A long pause. Meredith swallowed hard. "No, sir. Merely noting the irregularities." Grayson turned back to Elijah. "Mr. James, if you're willing, we would like you to meet with our Advanced Development Division, share your findings, perhaps even work with us moving forward." A gasp ran through the engineers. "You're offering him a seat at the table?" one of them blurted. "Talent is talent," Grayson said firmly, "and initiative of this caliber should be rewarded." Elijah's heart raced. "Thank you, sir, I'd be honored." Before Meredith could protest, another sponsor added, "We may also wish to set up a mentorship or internship program." Clearly, the next generation of engineers should not be overlooked. Suddenly, the power in the room had shifted entirely. Meredith stood stiff as a board, her mind reeling. She'd lost control of the narrative, and worse, her own standing with the board. Vince stepped over to Elijah, clapping a hand on his shoulder. "Told you, kid. You shook the tree." Elijah smiled softly, but his eyes remained calm. He hadn't done this for fame or even the opportunity. He had done it because he loved the challenge, the craft, and because he'd known in his heart that it was possible. Harlan pushed through the crowd now, breathless and wide-eyed. "Son, you all right?" Elijah turned, grinning. "I'm good, Dad, real good." Grayson addressed them both. "Mr. James, Mr. Harlan James, we'll be in touch soon. Your son has quite a future ahead of him." Harlan could barely process it. He'd worked the floors of MacArthur for more than 2 decades, mopping, polishing, invisible to the engineers. Now they were shaking his hand. "Thank you, sir," he managed, voice thick with emotion. As the sponsors departed and the crowd began to thin, Meredith lingered, her icy gaze fixed on Elijah. "You may have won this round," she said under her breath, "but don't think you walk in here like you own the place." Elijah met her gaze without flinching. "I don't want to own it. I just want to fix things," she blinked. There was no arrogance in his voice, only truth, and somehow that stung even more. By the time they left that afternoon, Elijah and Harlan both knew nothing at MacArthur would ever be the same again. Outside the gates, reporters waited, cameras flashed. "Are you really just 14? How did you figure out the timing loop? What's next for you?" Elijah smiled, humble as ever. "I just paid attention," he said, "that's all." But deep down he knew this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. The Monday after the demonstration, MacArthur facility buzzed with new energy. For the first time in years, the Fusions X2 was being discussed not as a failure, but as a success story, and all thanks to Elijah James. Word spread fast. Industry blogs picked up the video from the showcase. A headline read, "14-year-old son of janitor revives dead fusion engine street." But inside MacArthur, the atmosphere was far more complicated. Elijah and Harlan arrived for their morning shift as usual, but the greetings were different now. Some engineers nodded to them with genuine respect. Others looked away, uncomfortable. And a few, especially those closest to Meredith, watched with thinly veiled resentment. Elijah felt it, the way rooms quieted when he entered, the way voices dropped to whisper. "They're nervous," Vince told him in the break room. "A lot of them are embarrassed. You made 'em look bad without even trying." "I didn't mean to," Elijah said quietly. "I know that, kid. But folks with pride, they don't always care about your intent. They care about their image." That afternoon, an official memo arrived from corporate headquarters. Effective immediately, Elijah James is invited to participate in MacArthur Advanced Development's mentorship program under corporate sponsorship, further educational opportunities to be explored. Elijah's eyes widened when he read it. Harlan sat heavily in his chair. "Boy, you done gone and got yourself a future." It was the opportunity of a lifetime, but it also meant staying at MacArthur, under the same roof as Meredith, who had not forgotten her humiliation. She wasted no time making her feelings clear. At the next staff meeting, her tone was sharp and cold. "While the recent event brought unexpected results," she said, eyes flicking toward Elijah in the back row, "let us remember, MacArthur remains a place of professional engineering. Proper procedures and training are still required." A few of her loyal staff smirked, but others exchanged uneasy glances. Later that day, Elijah's access to Bay 9 was delayed pending further review. His new badge was awaiting approval. His mentorship session was rescheduled. She was stalling, trying to slow him down. When Vince found out, he shook his head. "She's playing games, kid. Trying to frustrate you, make you quit." Elijah stayed calm. "I won't quit." "You sure? 'Cause this road's gonna get rough." "I'm sure." That night at home, Harlan laid a heavy hand on his son's shoulder. "You got more heart than anyone I know, boy. But you don't gotta prove nothing to them no more." Elijah met his father's eyes. "I know, but this isn't about them. It's about what I love. I'm not walking away." The next morning, everything changed again. A surprise visitor arrived at MacArthur. Mr. Grayson himself, flanked by 2 senior directors from corporate headquarters. Meredith greeted them with a forced smile. "Unexpected, sir. We prefer to call it proactive," Grayson replied. "The board is very interested in young Mr. James's work. We'd like to see more." Elijah and Harlan were summoned to the conference room. Cameras flashed. Hands were shaken. "Your talent speaks for itself," one director told Elijah. "We'd like to fast-track your involvement in our R&D division, immediate mentorship. No more delays." Meredith's face was a mask. "Of course," she said through gritted teeth. A corporate order couldn't be stalled, not without consequences. By the end of the day, Elijah had a new badge, a real one, access to Bay 9 and beyond. His name now appeared on internal project rosters, and the whispers around the facility shifted again. Kid's official now. Corporate's backing him. What's Meredith going to do about that? The tension was palpable. That evening, as Elijah packed his backpack to leave, Meredith intercepted him in the hall. "You think this changes everything?" she said coldly. Elijah looked up at her, calm as ever. "No, ma'am," he said. "It just lets me do what I came here to do." She stared at him for a long moment, searching for arrogance, for weakness, but she found none. And that, more than anything, made her furious. As Elijah and Harlan walked to their old beat-up car, the sun setting behind the gleaming facility, Harlan looked over. "You ready for what's coming, son? 'Cause now you really in it." Elijah smiled. "I've been ready," and deep down he knew this wasn't just about one engine anymore. It was about proving that skill, passion, and heart mattered more than title, background, or pedigree. And he wasn't going to stop now. The weeks that followed changed everything. Elijah now walked the halls of MacArthur facility not as the janitor's boy, but as an official mentee under the Advanced Development Division. His name was on project lists. He had an access bag clipped to his chest, and though the whispers hadn't stopped, the tone had changed from mockery to curiosity, and in some corners, grudging respect. Some engineers, especially the younger ones, began to ask him questions to spot the feedback loop. "Could you show me your timing sync code? Do you think the same method would work on the X4 prototype?" Elijah shared what he could. He had no desire to hoard knowledge. He loved engines, and if others wanted to learn, that was enough for him. But not everyone welcomed his rise. Meredith fought back in subtle ways, undermining meetings, assigning him the dullest. Yet every time she tried, the corporate sponsors stepped in. Mr. Grayson in particular had made it clear. Let the boy work. Vince grinned whenever he saw Elijah in the labs. "Told you, kid. You're making him sweat." Elijah shrugged, focused on his work. He was already sketching new ideas, ways to further stabilize the X2, optimize fuel flow, improve the thermal tolerance. His mind raced ahead of the older engineers, and some of them began to realize it. Meanwhile, the story of the showcase spread beyond the walls of MacArthur. An article in Engineering World Monthly ran with the headline, "From Mop to Mechanic, How a Janitor's Son Changed Advanced Propulsion." By the end of the month, Elijah received an invitation to speak at a local tech symposium. His father's eyes brimmed with pride when the letter arrived. "You're going to stand up there, in front of all them folks?" Harlan asked. "If they'll listen," Elijah said, smiling. And they did. At the symposium, surrounded by experts and scholars, Elijah took the stage. He spoke simply about his love for machines, about curiosity, about paying attention to the small details others missed. He didn't boast. He didn't brag. He just told the truth. When he finished, the room rose in a standing ovation. Afterward, an older engineer approached him, gray-haired and well-known in the industry. "You remind me of someone I used to be," the man said quietly. "Don't let them change you." Elijah nodded. "I won't." Back at MacArthur, things continued to evolve. Corporate headquarters approved a scholarship fund in Elijah's name to help other underprivileged kids with talent get access to engineering programs. They called it the James Initiative. When Harlan heard, he was speechless. "You fixed a lot more than that." One crisp morning, a few months later, a new sign was quietly installed outside Bay 9. Fusion XP Program, Revival Team, lead contributor Elijah James. Some engineers grumbled. Meredith seethed. But the plaque stood. Elijah barely noticed. He was too busy. By now he had joined a small think tank on next-gen propulsion systems. His ideas were already helping redesign the X4. The future was wide open. And every evening he still walked the old halls with his father. "Ready to go home, son?" Harlan would ask. "Yeah, Dad. Got more code to write tonight. Always." Aloha smiled. "I know." As they stepped out into the evening light, the old Fusion X2 thrummed softly in the background, alive, running, no longer forgotten, just like the boy who had fixed it. And though there would be more challenges ahead, more resistance, more battles to fight, Aloha James had already proven the most important thing. It didn't matter where you came from. It mattered what you could do. And that truth would echo in those halls for years to come. Dear friend, this story reminds us, talent, brilliance, and heart can come from anywhere. Never judge a person by their title, background, or clothes. The next genius could be the kid you overlook. Let's build a world where opportunity is based on skill and passion, not privilege. If this story inspired you even just a little, please hit that like button and subscribe to this channel for more powerful stories that uplift and open our minds. Together, we can spread awareness, fight bias, and remind the world greatness lives everywhere. Stay curious, stay kind, and keep believing.